Good evening all, and welcome. Being stranded can be a pretty horrible sensation. Even though we have phones, cars, and many ways to not be stranded anymore, on the rare occasion that it does happen, I'm sure it is terrifying, as you're about to find out. So get comfortable, and let the darkness take control. I've had some weird stuff happen lately, and it reminded me of a strange encounter that happened about 5 years ago. It was spring here in Utah, meaning cold mornings that require a coat and usually scraping your windows before leaving. I lived in a relatively remote community west of the railroad tracks that lead to oil refineries in my area. Not exactly a busy area, and very little housing where I lived in at the time, although now it's a bustling community. One Friday morning about 9:30, as I am on my way to work, my usual route is blocked due to an accident being cleared up, so I take the quieter route through the industrial park east of my house. I passed the only gas station on my way and headed through the industrial park, which is quiet except for diesel trucks and the rare car like my own. As I come over a small hill and over a set of train tracks, I see a car pulled over to the side with its hood up, and a guy just standing there next to the driver's side door looking at me as I approach the hill. The car was a copper-colored, two-door sports car from the late 70s or early 80s, Nissan I think. He looked straight out of the 70s, I'll never forget this guy. Blue jeans, white collar shirt showing above his coat, tan work boots, darkish tan, 70s style leather coat, with wool showing at the collar, a thick dark moustache, and a John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever-esque haircut. Bigger guy, probably in his mid-40s, around 6 feet tall or just over. Bit of a gut, but clearly a thick dude who wasn't in bad shape. Hands in pockets, but his feet planted firmly and back straight like he was at a parade rest. As I see him, I slow down to see what the problem was and start to pull over and get behind his car, and he's staring at me the entire time. No nod of recognition or hand wave to signal me. No smile, just staring with his face perfectly flat, hands in pockets not moving. I get this super creepy vibe, and as I'm about to pull over, I pulled away and sped off instead. That's very unlike me. I stop to help people all the time, but this guy really gave me a bad feeling I couldn't shake. As I look in the rearview mirror, I see he's not moved, but just turned his head a bit to watch me go, and as I watch, he turns back to stare over the tracks for the next car to come along. I get to work and I'm feeling bad that I didn't help him out. But I tell my boss/close friend about the encounter, and he tells me he gets creeped out hearing about it, and I should be glad I trusted my gut instinct. I didn't think much more of it and get to work. On my way home, I take that road back home to see if his car was left there, just in case he had a real problem, and sure enough it was gone. Feeling relieved he had at least gotten his car taken care of, I felt less bad about not helping some stranded stranger because I got weirded out by his appearance and demeanor. I got home, got some sleep, and think nothing of it. I worked Saturdays at the time and always took the long way to work on Saturday since I didn't have to worry about traffic. Come 9:30 the next day, I'm heading the same way to work I took the day before. But because the industrial park is full of Monday to Friday type companies, it's always a ghost town on the weekend. When I came home the previous night, I drove for 15 minutes in that area. Really low speed limits, and it's a really long road, and did not see another car on the road there. Even the gas station closes its inside operations on Saturdays and evenings after 6. Nobody was even around the area during those hours. So I'm cresting the hill, and sure enough, the same guy is there again. Same car, same spot, hood up, and standing next to the driver's side door. If I hadn't have been so creeped out by the guy the day before, I may not have noticed how eerily similar it was, like he somehow hadn't moved since the day before. This time, however, he reacted to seeing me, pulling a hand out of his pocket and trying to wave me down. Without moving his feet and clearly yelling something, I speed up. He clearly heard my tin can of a Toyota rev up, and I kid you not, he put both hands up and moved as if to step in front of my car to block me. His face never changed the whole time, just a blank stare and semi-frown slit of a mouth as he started to step in front of my car in the two-lane road I was on. I swerved a little to avoid hitting him and kept going. Now, here's the thing. That section of the road is straight for quite a way, and though I was really shaken up by the encounter, I looked in my mirror to see him just step back into his car and keep staring west, just like the day before, like a stranger hadn't just swerved to avoid killing him and leaving him to his own devices. It was weird. I never saw him again after that, but I called my local police force, of whom I know several officers personally, one of which was a neighbor, thinking maybe he really did have a problem. At the time, a few things stood out to me, namely that the day before at the gas station it would have been open, and if he didn't have a cell phone it was less than a block away, and he would have had to have passed it in order to be on that particular stretch of road. No way you couldn't have seen it and been where he was supposedly broken down. I hadn't thought of it Friday, but it struck me hard Saturday when I saw him again the second time, and everything was the same. Car with the hood up, outfit, even shirt as far as I could tell, place, and even the way he stood, just waiting for a car to come from the west just over the hill, where he had been hard to see in the way until you were fairly close. And since I knew his car hadn't been left overnight, that felt very, very wrong. Lastly, the dead look on his face when he tried to flag me down. I could see him clearly. I was going at 25 miles per hour, which is the speed limit on that particular spot, and he didn't change his expression when he saw me. He just went through the motions. That was probably the most unsettling part to me. It was like he knew what to do, but not how to do it right emotionally. Also, that he just turned back to staring immediately after I passed him. Like the day I asked one of my cop buddies if they came across the guy, but he hadn't heard anything. And even later on I came to find out that the cop on that route hadn't come across anyone when he stopped by a bit later. It's a smallish town, not that much happens, and non-emergencies are slow to be dealt with at best. My buddy told me thanks for calling. Stranded motorists can really get hosted when no one is around, but also good on me for following my instinct about the guy. Basically, if you feel creeped out by a stranded motorist, call the cops, and they'll find them help. Long story short, I never saw the guy again, and I hope I never do, because whatever his game was, I know his car wasn't just breaking down in the same convenient, hard-to-see spot repeatedly. All of the creepy stuff I've seen in my life, this is the one that comes to mind when I think of unsettling and unnerving run-ins. I'm 24. This happened 2 years ago on Memorial Day weekend. After a solid weekend of partying in Las Vegas, 2 of my friends and I, all dudes of the same age, had to endure the horrific drive from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. If you haven't done this drive before, it is typically a 5-hour stint through the desert, but on a busy weekend, it can be extended to 7 to 9 hours, and a hangover from a 3-day binge is always painful. Our other friends that were flying out talked us into staying for the better part of the day to wait out the traffic. We had a buffet and lazed around the pool a bit more, hoping to recover, and decided to leave at 3 p.m. Perfect, we'll be home by 8. We were wrong. 2 accidents and a billion people on the road impeded our progress greatly. It took us 6 hours to get to Barstow, which is typically only the first 2 hours. We filled up with gas and coffee and hit the road again. This stop took an hour due to the mass amount of people passing through the area. Back on the road at 10, more traffic, a wrong turn, and it's now 2:30. And we were passing through Santa Clarita about 45 minutes from our destination. Then we heard a horrific noise. It sounded like a piece of steel ripping like paper then exploding, but I managed to pull the car off the freeway and onto the side street. I called the AA, and they said it should be about half hour. Crap situation, but half hour's not that bad. The neighborhood we were in was alright, multiple gated communities, but the road we were on was desolate, and a bit of an artery between communities. We all napped, and about 15 minutes later I was awoken by a car driving in the opposite direction. It was an SUV, maybe a Toyota 4Runner with 4 people in it. I couldn't tell what they looked like, but they were looking at us. A few minutes after, I get a call from the AA. Apparently when I called, they thought I said Santa Clara, which is 6 hours north in the San Francisco area. It would be another hour before they could reroute someone to us. We go back to sleep, and roughly half hour later that same SUV drives by our side of the road, going much faster this time, as they pass, and they flash lights into our car. I'm not sure if it was to scare us, or to see if anyone was inside, as the windows were fogged. But my red flags went up. For safety reasons, I always kept a Bowie knife and a miniature bat under my seat. I know it's childish, but it makes me feel safe. So I took the knife and handed my buddy in the passenger seat the bat. He was asleep and didn't understand what was going on, so I briefed him, but he passed out, and it was just me again. A quarter of an hour passes, and the SUV pulls up about 300 feet behind my car, brights on, and I officially begin to freak out. I wake up my 2 friends without them moving their heads, so team creepers can't see, and we begin forming strategies, but we are genuinely scared since we are stranded and outnumbered. The SUV turns off the lights, and I can see them passionately talking about something. So we sit there, freaking the hell out, and look at them, just waiting to see what they're gonna do. And I decide to call the AA again, and they give me an ETA of 15 minutes. The passenger and driver door both open, and 2 linebacker-sized men get out, hoods up, all in black. The driver leans against the grill of the car and smokes a cigarette, staring at us. The passenger pisses on the sidewalk. I felt like they were playing mind games. Maybe they saw the light from my cell phone. It felt like the passenger was urinating forever. The 3 of us are just sitting there, stewing in our own fear. The passenger zips up and talks with the driver. The other 2 doors open, revealing one small person with a beanie pulled low, and another large hooded man walked out. The 4 begin to talk and walk casually towards my car. I pull my knife ready. My buddy has his bat, and my other friend pops up his fists like a fighting Irishman. They get close, then stop about halfway. In the distance were the lights of the tow truck. I look back and see them get back in the SUV. As the tow truck operator gets out, we get out and he starts his business, and the SUV speeds off fairly quickly. We didn't get home till 5 a.m. I'm not entirely sure what they were planning. I'm assuming they thought the car was abandoned and wanted to take it, or something more sinister, if they knew that we were in there. My friend in the back seat has long hair, so maybe they thought he was a girl. I'll never know, but that was an intense night. My family and I were coming back from spring break in Florida. I was in 8th grade then. Our flight coming home went from Tampa to Houston, then Houston to home. We get to Houston at 10 a.m. on Saturday and have a 3-hour layover. Our flights get cancelled because of a massive storm that affected half the US. Continental's policy is to put passengers from cancelled flights on standby on a different flight. Well, getting 5 people, my family, on the same flight when we all stranded is, as you can imagine, quite difficult. We spent the entire afternoon at the airport. Then, we're about to get on a plane, but the flight was cancelled at the last minute because no pilots could get to the Houston airport at the end of the month, when the pilots have used most of their flight hours. So now we have 2 flights cancelled and are still on standby. My dad gets angry and goes to a manager. The manager gets us an actual seat on a plane that will take us some town in North Carolina, which we can get a plane home from. This flight ends up getting cancelled around 9 PM on Saturday. Now my mum is angry too. She talks to a desk attendant and got belligerent. They almost had to call the TSA on her because she was getting too upset. My dad ends up telling the attendant that he doesn't care where we have to go to get home, we just want to leave Houston. This apparently meant a flight to Seattle, the opposite side of the country from our home, and my dad flips out at this obvious stupidity. So we're still on standby for a red-eye flight home. It turns out there are 3 seats open, 1 for my dad and 2 for my 2 younger sisters. They go down the walkway only to have the flight attendant tell them the flight is full, and we end up spending the night at the airport. At 10 AM we finally got a flight home. It was the same flight we were originally scheduled for except a day later. All in all, we spent 27 hours in the Houston airport, not knowing if we would even get a flight in time to make it home for school to start back up. For our troubles, we received a whopping $40, for 5 people mind you, in Houston airport food vouchers and 2 candy bars per person. Last night, my sister, who lives 3 hours away from me, had somewhat of an emergency and asked if I could come stay the night with her. I packed my bags right away and headed there at 9 AM. As I was about an hour away from my apartment, I realized that my car wasn't going to make it. The temperature gauge was rising and I didn't want to risk it overheating in the middle of nowhere. So I turn around, and when I'm about 15 minutes from home, my car overheats. At this point it's about 11:30 PM. I pulled off an exit and waited for it to cool down, then got back on the highway, but it did it again. So I pulled off onto the side of the highway. As I'm waiting for it to cool down, I tried to start it again, and it wouldn't start at all. I'm a 23-year-old female, all alone, new to town, and my boyfriend was out of town, so I start to panic a little, because I've read way too many Reddit stories. I managed to calm down and call my stepdad to let him know where I was and that I was going to call a tow truck. As I was on the phone with him, 2 cars pull off the highway right in front of me, and then 1 right behind me. At first, I thought they were going to help me, or that they were all traveling together and needed to stop. But it was really weird to me that they all pulled off at the same spot I did, with 1 pulling behind me, and they all sat in their cars for what felt like forever, but was probably no more than 3 minutes. Then a man got out of 1 car, the one in front of me, and began to walk towards my car. He came to the passenger side door, stopped for a second, then walked to the car behind me. This whole time I'm describing what he looks like to my dad just in case. He was then in the car for a while, walked back towards my car, and as he was passing my window, hit it with his knuckle, knocking once, and he kept walking. Then he sat there for a while, and then all left at once. I'm realizing as I'm saying this, it doesn't seem that weird, but being alone on the highway with 3 cars pulled off in front of you and behind you is a suffocating feeling, and I really don't understand why he felt the need to knock on my window as he was walking by. I'm not gonna lie, it made me cry a little because it was so bizarre. I'm hoping they just pulled off to talk to each other, and I was just overreacting. But, please, let's not meet. Over 10 years ago, during the summer, My friend's 13-year-old niece, Katie, flew home from Boston, Massachusetts to Florida for a week-long visit. Her plane was arriving at the Jacksonville airport, so my friend and I hop into my little red 4-door Colorado truck and drive the 3 hours from Tallahassee, Florida, to Jacksonville, Florida, to pick her up. Yes, there's an airport in Tallahassee. However, it is a small airport and quite expensive to fly in and out of. For example, a round-trip plane ticket that would cost $300 if you used any other airport would cost about $800 if you use the Tallahassee airport. Therefore, many travelers coming to Tallahassee use other airports and drive the remaining distance, because it's cheaper in the long run. Anyway, we arrive in Jacksonville and pick up Katie. One thing I should mention in regards to myself is that I am a very good-natured and fun-loving jokester. I like to tease people, never anything mean, just good old-fashioned make you laugh fun. So after we pick up Katie and are about 10 minutes down the road, I tell her, "Hey, just so you know, I'm a narcoleptic. If I fall asleep while driving, just nudge me real hard and I'll wake up." Confused, she asks, "Are you even allowed to drive?" "Oh yes, it's really no big deal. My doctor says it's fine. I have a note and everything." At that point, my friend Chelsea and I, who have been friends for over 4 years and knows me very well, cuts her eyes towards me with a "What the hell are you up to?" look on her face and smirks. On the way home, we're laughing, joking, and having a great time. This was my first time meeting Katie, so I had a lot of questions like, what subjects do you like in school? Do you have any hobbies, a boyfriend? You know, the getting to know you type conversation. About 30 minutes into the drive and mid-sentence, I pretend to fall asleep, tilt my head back and start snoring. Now, due to the tilted angle of my head, I could still see the roadway from my ever so slightly opened eyes. I watched Katie's face through the rearview mirror, and the sheer panic and look of horror on her face was priceless. She began frantically to nudge me, trying desperately to wake me as I pretended to snooze away. Finally, I busted out, cracking up. She laughed so hard she couldn't breathe, and Katie, while she was clutching her chest and smiling, with an expression of relief on her face, and she began laughing too. So her week-long visit started off with a good laugh. Throughout the weeks, Chelsea and her family took Katie to do many fun things, like canoeing, hiking, and trips to the beach. During the evening, after I got off work, I could go to Chelsea's house, and we would all sit on her back porch to play dice. Oh, but alas, all good things must come to an end. It was the day before Katie was supposed to leave. Chelsea and I decided to take Katie to St. Augustine, as it was only a 45-minute drive to Jacksonville from there, and St. Augustine is one of our favorite places to go. For those of you who have never been to St. Augustine, let me tell you a bit about the place. It's a historic old town on the Atlantic coast of Florida. It is actually the oldest city in the US and was founded in 1565 by Spanish settlers. The place is absolutely gorgeous and the architecture is magnificent. There are many old shops in the center of the town, such as a store where you can make your own candles, and a coat of arms store where you can look up your family's surname and its history. There are also numerous tours of the historic buildings there, like the old fort, the jail, and the museums. There are also so many museums. The best thing about St. Augustine, at least for me and Chelsea, are the ghost tours. She and I had been on quite a few of them, and they're very interesting, so we made an agenda for the day. An afternoon of shopping, tours, and then a blissful evening of spookiness. Around 9 in the morning on Sunday, the day before Katie was supposed to depart, Chelsea, Katie, and I hopped into Chelsea's old dark green Dodge Caravan. It had much more legroom than my truck, and headed to St. Augustine. About an hour and a half into our trip, her van began to overheat. Knowing that it would be bad for the engine if we were to continue driving, we pulled over on the side of the interstate, popped the hood and took a peek. Steam rolled out from under the hood, so the only thing we could do was wait for the vehicle to cool off before we checked it out. 30 minutes later, we took the cap off the radiator, and sure enough, there was no liquid. We desperately looked around Chelsea's van for some water, but there was nothing. The only fluids we had were a few half bottles of 2-day-old tea and a half bottle of old Coca-Cola. Nothing that we could use to put in the vehicle's radiator because of the sugar content. We started wondering what we could do. We were on the other side of the interstate. We didn't even know where we were exactly, and none of us could remember what the last mile marker was that we had passed. Now I know what you're thinking. Why didn't we just look it up on our phones? Well, this was before smartphones were widely popular, and GPS wasn't even available on them. As we're scratching our brains, trying to figure out a way out of this situation, miracle upon miracle, it started to rain hard. It was as if a tropical storm was brewing. For anyone who has ever visited or lived in Florida, summers here are usually very hot, very humid, and normally accompanied by rain. We Floridians tend to joke about the weather conditions here. If you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes and it'll change. Relieved for our good fortune, Chelsea, Katie and I frantically scrambled to find an empty cup and whatever other containers Chelsea had lying around that we could catch rainwater in. Together, we found about 3 or 4 red Solo cups and strategically placed the cups in various areas. 2 cups we placed under the far end corners of the back bumper, because the rainwater was pooling and pouring onto the ground in those areas. The other cups we placed on the hood of the vehicle. We got in Chelsea's van drenched from the rain and it stopped. All that effort and the rain just stopped. We got out to see how much water we had gathered. Unfortunately, collectively, there were only perhaps 2 or 3 ounces of rainwater. What to do? This wouldn't be enough to make it get anywhere, and we didn't know where the next exit was. Should we chance driving without water? Surely between the 3 of us we could come up with an idea. I had an idea. The divots on the side of the interstate, designed to wake up drivers if they run them over. The ones were affectionately known as drunk bumps. There's rainwater in between them, but how could we get them to use for the radiator? Well, as we had the red Solo cups, but the cups alone wouldn't help get the water out of the divots. Chelsea had a straw, and then we promptly began sucking rainwater through the straw of the divots and spitting them into the cup. Nasty but necessary. Now this section of the I-10 is very wooded, but by no means desolate. There's plenty of traffic, especially on a Sunday. So while I continued to suck rainwater out the divots, Chelsea kept an eye on the traffic. Anytime a vehicle were coming, Chelsea would yell at me that I would need to move. The placement of the divots was close to the lines on the side of the road that are there to guide drivers. Therefore, I'm on my hands and knees sucking rainwater through a straw, my head approximately 5 or 6 inches into the road. If I didn't move in time, my head would have been a passerby's new tire decal. Picture this, a 25-year-old, 5-foot-tall blonde female on her knees on the side of a busy interstate, sucking rainwater from a drunk bump, while a 36-year-old, 5-foot-9-inch-tall blonde female is yelling at her to move. Each time she yelled, I would bounce up and back, still holding the red Solo cup in my hand and the straw in my mouth, only to drop back to my knees and suck more rainwater. After 15 minutes of doing this, we decided it was too risky to continue. We took the 1.5 to 2 ounces of water I had collected and risked my life for, and combined it with the rainwater we had for a grand total of about 3.5 to 4 ounces of water. Still not enough. We really wanted to be independent women and figure out our own mess, but we broke down and did what any damsel in distress would do. I called my boyfriend, now husband, who was working in Mississippi, which was about 10 hours from where we were. He couldn't help us directly, but he was a mechanic, and we thought that maybe he could give us some advice on what to do. Sadly, he didn't answer, so we called another friend of ours, Tom, who used to be a mechanic in the army. Fortunately for us, Tom answered his phone, and we explained the circumstances. He confirmed that the rainwater we collected wouldn't be enough, and said that we could still use it if we needed to filter it through something first to prevent dirt or debris from getting into the radiator. We were at a loss. We don't have anything to stream water, we explained. Sure you do. Use a sock. Chelsea and I didn't have any socks as we were wearing flip-flops and hadn't packed any sneakers. But Katie had all of her luggage with her and thus had socks. She graciously gave us her socks and we poured the almost 4 ounces of water through it into the radiator. This clearly wasn't enough. We don't know what else to do. We need more water and all we have is 2-day-old tea and hot Coca-Cola. Are there any puddles by the side of the road? Tom inquired. No, we already looked. Does anyone have to pee? Pee? Chelsea said with a chuckle. Yeah, you can put urine in the radiator. It's not ideal, but it's clean and won't mess up your car. Really? Urine? Chelsea and I looked at each other in unison. Katie can pee. There is something I haven't told you yet. Katie was born with a birth defect, in which she was born without external genitalia. Basically, she was as smooth as a Barbie doll in her nether region. Therefore, she had a medically inserted port into her bladder, from which she could urinate practically on demand. The only thing Katie had to do was attach the tube to her port, and our troubles would be over. Life-saving golden liquid would flow from this magnificent child. We thanked Tom, hung up the phone and smiled, and started forcing Katie to drink the 2-day-old bottle of tea and Coca-Cola. All the while Katie complained how much she hated the taste. Can't say I blame her. The tea had been sitting in a vehicle for 2 days and definitely wouldn't taste good. And while Katie sat drinking the nasty liquids, she hooked up to her medical tubing, with a bottle at the other end. Chelsea and I converted one of the red Solo cups into a funnel and began grabbing the bottles of urine to fill up the radiator. At this point I must tell you something about myself. I have an aversion to certain smells, urine being one of them. The smell of pure, concentrated urine. I shudder to think of it. So Chelsea had to do the honors of pouring the urine into the radiator, but I unfortunately was holding the bottles of warm liquid and handing them to her. While she's pouring them into the radiator, the smell hit me, and I began to gag, almost vomiting everywhere. In between my gagging gasps and awful retching, I'm telling Chelsea to hurry. While she's pouring the last bottle of pee, Katie is in the middle of filling up another one, and a state police officer sees us on the side of the road and pulls up behind us. Chelsea's van door is open with Katie urinating into a bottle via her medical tubing. Thoroughly embarrassed, Katie quickly slams the van door shut and tries to hide what she is doing, like a druggie trying to hide dope from the cops. I quickly kicked the previously used medical tubes that Katie had discarded on the ground under the van, as I was afraid the officer would think we were doing something illegal. After we explained to the officer what was going on, of course leaving out the divot sucking and urine being poured into the radiator parts, he informed us in a southern drawl there's an exit only a mile down the road and there's a gas station with a water hose. We thanked him and with the urine-filled radiator proceeded to the gas station with the officer following us. The entire 5-minute drive to the gas station we felt like idiots, because if we'd paid attention and known exactly where we were, we could have made it to the gas station without having to go through this entire ordeal. But this is not where the story ends. We filled up the radiator with water and knew we had to get Chelsea's vehicle fixed or we wouldn't be able to make it anywhere, let alone take Katie to the airport next morning. By this time it was 6 in the evening. We decided to find a mechanic shop after asking the gas clerk where the nearest service station was. We drove a few miles down the road only to find the place had closed for the evening. Just our luck. We sat in the parking lot not knowing what to do next. We couldn't just drive around looking for a hotel. Even if we found one, what would we do the next morning? And how would we get Katie to the airport? About that time, a worker leaving the service station sees us, Bob, and asks us what our problem is. We explained to him that we were from out of town and having car trouble, and that we were trying to get Katie to the airport to catch a flight. Bob graciously decides to take a look. We pop the hood, sit in the van, and watch through the gap between the windshield and hood of the van. Bob uses a hose to fill up the radiator with water. Now, because of the urine concentration in the radiator, the water begins to foam and look like a head of beer. Bob looks confused by this. Our eyes widen, and we give each other knowing glances. We begin to quietly whisper to each other, "Oh no, pee-pee." Katie's face begins to blush from embarrassment. Baffled and unbeknownst to him, Bob proceeds to stick his index and middle finger in the urinary froth, swirl it around a few times and sniff it. He does it a few times trying to figure out what it is. At this point, I slide to my knees on the floorboard in the passenger side, buried my head in the seat, and started laughing hysterically, trying not to let Bob hear me. Chelsea followed suit. She was standing outside the driver door with her head buried in the driver's seat, laughing. We kept repeating over and over through tears and laughter, "Katie's pee," who was sitting behind us. She was mortified. She kept telling us to shut up. It was so embarrassing. We were laughing so hard we could barely breathe, with tears rolling down our face. Bob finally finished making the repairs. Turns out it was just a cracked hose leading from the radiator. He didn't even charge us, but we thanked him and gave Bob all the cash we had, which was about $20, and were on our way. Once the van was down the road, Chelsea and I both simultaneously bust out with the loudest belly laughter as we recalled the entire day's events. We made it to our hotel room in St. Augustine, although it was way too late to go on the ghost tour, and we were able to take Katie to Jacksonville the next morning to catch her flight. Everything turned out well in the end, but the entire experience is one that I'll never forget, and continues to make me laugh to this day. I guess the lesson from this event is to always carry extra water in your vehicle, and, in an emergency, urine works. I used to go out with a girl called Cheryl. Cheryl was a very volatile girl. We met through a dating app, and she seemed nice at first, but on the few dates we went on, I wasn't getting that many sparks from her. She was so loud and obnoxious and rude. She was smoking hot, which is why I put up with it at first. But there was this one time that the waiter bought her a pizza. The pizza itself was half of what she ordered, and I think it was missing one topping. I can't remember what it was, something random and strange like anchovies. And she started screaming at the waiter, telling him he was incompetent and useless, and how dare he get her order wrong. I found this incredibly offensive. But again, I was blinded in my youth and she was hot. I wasn't getting the best vibes from her anymore, and after having a fun time with her, thought maybe it would be best to call it quits, as I knew that our relationship was doomed. So I planned a romantic night in a camp. I thought it would be nice. She liked camping, and she loved the idea. I thought maybe the best thing to do was to bring one tent, have a nice evening together, and then the next morning let her down on the high of a nice date. I realized that was foolish. In any case, she goes along with it, and halfway through the evening of us just chilling and chatting by the campfire, roasting s'mores and whatnot, does she suddenly get a bit jumpy. She looks at me, and as if she can detect what I was planning all along, she goes, "You're not breaking up with me, are you?" "No, babe." I lie. Shit, I think. She's caught on to what I want to do. I wasn't sure if I should just carry on the lie or be straight with her, but I really didn't want this night to go to crap and wanted to follow my original plan. So I say, nah, let's just enjoy the night. She smiles weakly and goes, "Okay." We carry on our chatting and eating, and that's when we run out of beer. She hasn't drunk anywhere near as much as I have, and says, "I'll go get more beer, honey. I think we need a little bit more just to finish this night off and make it perfect." She says it with a little twinkle in her eye, and I, unsure how to receive this, just smile and nod, hand her my car keys, and she says she shouldn't be longer than 20 minutes. I must let you know that where we were camping was not very far in. It was about a 5-minute walk to the car and a 10-minute drive to the local gas station to pick up beer and to come back, so she really shouldn't be that long. I sit and wait looking through my phone. 10 minutes pass. No worries. 20 minutes pass. No worries. Half hour passes. Okay, maybe there was a queue. An hour passes, and she doesn't come back. So I start ringing her phone and she doesn't answer. I carry on going, both worried that she's hijacked my car and that maybe something's happened to her. I keep calling to nothing. And then, after about 3 hours, this point it's approaching midnight, and I'm about crapping myself, does she send a solitary message. I don't like the fact that you lied to me. It's over. That was it. That was all she said. I reply saying, babe, is everything alright? What's going on? I wait till about 1 a.m. until she replies, we're over. That was it. I frantically texted her more and more during the night, but she never responded. Shit. I fell asleep, and when I woke up, my battery on my phone had completely drained, given that I had been calling and messaging her non-stop, and I had foolishly left my portable battery pack and cable in the car. Shit. I was so annoyed. I was completely stranded. Admittedly, not too far from civilization, but stranded nonetheless by this crazy girl. I knew where she lived, so I knew where my car should be, and that wasn't really an issue. It was more getting out of here that what I was worried about. So, I begrudgingly pack up the tent, put everything away, and start hauling it to the end of the campsite. When I get to the parking lot, I realize there's no way I can carry all of this very far, and I start looking around to see if there's anyone who can possibly get me an Uber to my home. I live maybe 25 minutes away, and I have about $15 in my pocket, and even if it's a bit more, I'd hope they wouldn't mind to help a guy out. But there's no one. I start to grow desperate. It's a little walk to the gas station. I know it's going to be about 2 hours. So, I'm willing to take my things. I leave them in a bush and make my way. It took a bit longer than I originally anticipated, and when I finally made it to the gas station attendant wasn't very helpful and offered to call the cops to come and get me. They took an hour to arrive, and when one of them finally arrived, he looked pissed that he had come to pick up some stranger. He was annoyed, said we weren't his taxi service, and thankfully let me use his phone to get an Uber into town. I got to my house and then realized my mistake. My house keys were on my car keys, which Cheryl still had. I then walked an hour to her house, banged on her door, and she wasn't there. I was furious. She'd left me stranded, with nowhere to go, and with no explanation as to why. I waited outside her door for 5 hours straight, and hid behind one of her bins when I saw her pull up in my car with another guy. When she starts walking with him hand in hand towards her house, I jump out and ask what the hell is going on. She looks at me in a very nonchalant way and says, "Go inside, Dave, I'll be there in a minute," unlocks her house door, and he goes in. I confront her and say that if she doesn't give me my car keys right now and an explanation, I'm calling the cops. She sighs and with a little smile goes, "I'm not stupid. I know you wanted to break up with me. So I had to teach you a lesson. This is what you get for pulling me along and lying to me." In a way, at the time, I felt like she was right. So I just snatched my keys out of her hand, unscrewed her 2 house door keys, threw them at her, and without another word, peeled off back home. I was absolutely livid. That girl absolutely wasted my day and left me stranded. Anything could have happened to me. What a horrible, horrible person. Admittedly, my intentions weren't all that good, trying to give her a nice night before breaking up with her. But even so, I don't feel like I deserved that. In any case, Cheryl, I've moved on now and hope to never meet you again. Back in 2004, I was stationed in Japan with the US military. I flew home to visit my family for Christmas and then flew back to Japan. The problem was my plane leaving to the US got delayed for 3 hours while they resolved an issue with one of the engines. So I ended up missing my connecting flight from Tokyo to my Japanese city. No problem, I thought. I'll hop on the Shinkansen and I'll be home in a few hours. By the time I made it to Tokyo Station though, the last Shinkansen had left. They were closing the station for the night, and I figured I could just chill on a bench until the morning. But they went through the entire station shooing everyone out. They closed the giant metal gate after we were all outside. So now I'm stranded on the streets of Tokyo, a city I'm unfamiliar with in the middle of winter with nothing to do until 4 AM when the station reopens. I walked to a few nearby hotels, but they told me to get lost in so many words. So I finally gave up, perched myself on a street corner near the train station, and pulled out a book and decided to read to stay awake all night. I wasn't about to sleep on a street corner while carrying a backpack and suitcase in an unfamiliar city. Then, the craziest thing happened. Homeless people appeared out of nowhere. They pulled out brooms and started cleaning up the street. In the course of an hour, all the litter was gone, and the streets were dust and dirt free. They made the place shine, and then a bunch of them pulled out cardboard shelters, folded up behind vending machines and made their beds. 2 of the homeless guys approached the vending machine in front of me. One of them put out a small change purse and retrieved a few coins from it. He bought a can of hot coffee from the vending machine, as Japanese vending machines have both hot and cold drinks, and warmed his hands with it. He'd offered it to his friend as well, who warmed his hands, and then they offered it to me. I politely declined, knowing I would be back to my comfortable life the next day. I would stand a chilly winter night in the streets, and I didn't want to take their only source of heat away. In the early hours of the morning, the homeless folk all folded up their cardboard beds, tucked them away behind the vending machines, and they all wandered off, leaving no visible trace of their existence behind. At 4 AM, the gate opened, and I rushed to the ticket counter. I bought a ticket for the 9 AM Shinkansen and patiently waited on the platform for my train. By noon, I was rolling into my local station. And that's the story of how I got stranded on the streets of Tokyo for the night. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. So, being stranded is quite creepy. I hope you enjoyed the final story. It was more of a bonus, it wasn't really that scary, but I enjoyed it. It made me laugh a few times and I thought it was a wholesome thing to throw in the video, so I hope you guys liked it. I suppose I'll see you in the comment section tomorrow. In any case, I'd like to give a huge thank you as always to my wonderful patrons whose names can be seen on screen. Thank you so much for your donations. It really does mean a lot. If you're interested in donating a little bit every month to help keep the channel going, you can find that info on Patreon. I hope you guys consider it. In any case, for now it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.